Okay. So first of all, good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining me on the latest live stream. It's been a very eventful day. And sometimes, you look at things and you think to yourself, this is good timing. And I couldn't be more happy to have on this live stream tonight, David Sedgewick, who's author and of a couple of brilliant books on the BBC. And so we were going to talk about the BBC anyway. And of course, we've had the press conference in the Rose Garden with Dominic Cummings. So I think it's all really, really timely. So first of all, David, a warm welcome to the live stream.
Oh, good evening, David, and thanks for having me. Very good to be here. And hello to all the viewers and listeners.
So yeah, I don't know. Can you actually see their comments, David, as they scroll down the page? Can you see some of the things that they'll say? Because no doubt they'll have questions for you as well.
Well, I can't actually see any. There are no questions at the moment, though. I can't see any at the moment.
There's lots of hellos and the usual stuff. So anyway, so listen.
Maybe you're about to read one or two of them out to me.
I will. Well, in fact, actually, David, let me put this one up. Hang on. There we go.
Hi from Holland, yes.
There you go.
Oh, well, that's a cracker.
Yeah. So yeah. So listen, folks, we're gonna talk about the BBC, but let's start off with. I think some of you might have seen my very short Periscope, which I did just after the press conference, because frankly, I was disgusted and angry in equal measure with the performance of the media with Cummings. So I think I've made my views very clear. So perhaps, David, you can tell us what's your thoughts? How did you feel about it?
I don't know. I mean, the first thing that came to mind was car crash TV. It was addictive television viewing in the one hand. Poor old Dominic Cummings there. Like a naughty schoolboy, contrite, humble, but also being orchestrated by the pack of MSM rats. It was all very unedifying, I thought, and it was one of those situations. It was a no-win for him, wasn't it? Whatever he said was going to be lost in the noise. And I did notice that the MSS were trying desperately to behave themselves. Their antipathy towards him was just bubbling below the surface, wasn't it, all the way through the press conference? They were I think they'd been told by their executives best behavior, because over the last few days, MSM, you've not exactly shown yourselves in the best light. So I noticed how they were being extra polite and he was being very humble. And I thought the whole thing was a rather unedifying mess, really. I don't know if I assume it's done what they wanted it to do, but I've got a feeling that the MSM are not going to leave him alone on this. I think this is going to rumble on for days and days and days.
Yeah, I mean, it was seriously unedifying, the performance of all of them. I mean, we started off with Laura Kuenssberg. We'll talk more about BBC, but all of them, right the way through the Sky hacks, the Channel 4 hacks, all of them. I just thought it was like a pack of hyenas circling a man who's obviously gone through a very tough time, just on a human level. Mm-hmm. And for me, David, the thing that probably struck me as most missing in action was there was no humanity. Nobody seemed to give a toss about the 4-year-old child that obviously Dominic Cummings and his wife were worried about.
Yes.
How can people be like that? What happens, David, to people in the media that they become like this because it's so disgusting?
Yeah. I think it's been building for a while, this lack of, like you said, this lack of humanity, this pack mentality where it's to get a scalp, it's to scalp someone. And I've noticed on social media the last few days, a lot of people being turned off, and quite possibly it's going to backfire against them. And we've seen it in America with Trump, the mainstream media over there, the likes of CNN now, are reviled. So I don't know what the media were hoping to gain from this today. I mean, obviously it's a revenge mission because Dominic Cummings is the sort of the northern upstart who's come in there. He's rocked up in their circle. That the political elite can't stand him because they hold him responsible for Brexit. They certainly hold him responsible for masterminding Boris Johnson's 29 landslide. And he's an upstart, and they're thirsting for revenge. And it's very unedifying to watch professional media people resort to that sort of behaviour. I hope, and I think I've noticed on social media, people are really turned off by that behavior today. And like I said, in the Rose Garden then, you could see them trying desperately to be more normal human beings. They'd obviously been told, look, this is a big one today, don't blow it, you know. But they still couldn't help it. There were one or two really acerbic comments coming in there, weren't there, from a few that just couldn't help it. They genuinely hate this man. I incidentally, that whatever he did, I was a little bit surprised that he broke the curfew, the lockdown myself. I think we could all come up with a good reason why we could have done something, why we had to do something. And I was a bit surprised at him. For me, it was an open goal. It was an accident waiting to happen. He's quite a high profile figure now, and I was really surprised that he did that. Having said that, I think maybe he's got away with it. I'm glad that Boris Johnson and the Tories, I was expecting them to crumble. I was expecting them to throw him to the wolves. I really was. So at this moment in time, I'm not confident it's totally over, but I think they've staved it off today. And maybe him being all contrite and being humble, maybe that's satisfied those wolves, at least for a little while.
Yeah, because I think, as you say, Cummings has a reputation for pretty acerbic, and he's obviously a highly intellectual guy. His presentational skills are probably one reason he's not a politician. But he came across to me as you said, David, very, very humble, kind of self-effacing. But what I did like was the fact that the media seemed determined to sort of say to him, basically, well, don't you think, Mr. Cummings, that your actions could have cost lives, and your actions, could cause the breakdown in the lockdown? Mind you, I like to see that. And the way he answered, I thought was so clever when he said, well, when they were saying to him, people are angry. And he said, yes, well, that's not really surprising given the way, if they've been reading and watching some of the things that have been in the media. And wasn't that so accurate, what he said?
I think he was well prepped. I think he was well prepped, and I think he delivered it in the best way he could. The worst thing he could have done was to have been combative, because they were waiting for him to be combative. So I really like the humility. The humility worked. But like I said, I think they are so rabid and they're so gone past the point of reasonableness that I think they'll be back for more. I don't think that's killed it. I think the idea was, let's kill it. Let's get out there and let's face them. I can understand why they did that, but I think they're still going to come for him. I don't think we've heard the last of this yet.
No, because at the heart of this there's almost a separate issue, which is the media, David, seem to love the idea of the lockdown. They love the notion that, look, the rules are in place, we've got to obey them, so that's the end of it. And God forbid anyone uses, as Cummings did, a bit of common sense. So because they've established in their minds the lockdown rules are, they must not be broken. They're like the 11th commandment. Then as you said, the fact that Cummings broke them, even though he was perfectly entitled to do so, seems to have stirred the pot even more. But just one thing, and I'm sure viewers will have, I just wanted to say this. I was delighted to see the hashtag on Twitter trending, hashtag scum media, because that's how I feel about them.
Yes, I noticed that today, and I noticed also it was driving just the right people insane. So the people reacting to that were just the kind of awful people you would expect it to trigger. In other words, a bunch of metropolitan leftist London pro-EU types were getting very triggered by that, and it's interesting to see them actually defending especially leftists defending what I would call the corporate media, and to watch leftists defending them, saying they're not scum. How dare you call the media? How dare you call the mainstream media bad names? Socialists standing up for the mainstream media, the corporate mainstream media. Interesting stuff.
Yeah, I mean, here's someone on the stream who's pretty much echoing your own comments, David, that the Remain media will keep coming after Dominic Cummings. Now they smell blood. I sincerely hope Boris Johnson stays strong, and it's not helped by other people in the Conservative Party, including in Westminster, who obviously don't like Cummings. So this is an opportunity to stick to them. What about Steve Baker?
Just incredible. And the comments he received after trying to throw Cummings out there was very revealing. People said, "We thought you were one of the good guys." This was definitely not the time. I believe that he's annoyed that he's been overlooked for a job or something, and he blames Cummings. But at
Yeah.
that time, that was definitely not the best move when you've got effectively a left-wing MSM media baying for blood. That was definitely ill-judged. And if I was Boris Johnson, I'd be looking at that man and wondering what to do with him. I mean, really, that was disgraceful. But it's like I've said for a long time, how many people in the Conservative Party can you say are true Conservatives? I mean, you could put Steve Baker now with people like Anna Soubry, Heidi Allen, my favourite, ex-Cambridgeshire MP.
Yeah.
You know, these fake Conservatives. What Steve Baker did today has certainly shaken my faith in him, a lot of other people, I think.
Well, sir, I mean, certainly I completely agree. We have fake Conservatives, but what we have is what I also think, and I know we've talked about this before. I would say these are fake journalists. They're not journalists as you and I might, and many people watching would understand it. They're not seekers of truth, trying to reveal things that are highly relevant. They're partisan activists. To my mind, what say you?
Well, I call them, in my books, I actually call BBC journalists. I can't actually bring myself to use the word journalist. Or if I do, I put it in inverted commas. If I'm talking about BBC, the best I can do is put it in inverted commas, because journalism is not journalism. This makes me laugh when you hear some of these pious people like Adam Bolton on Sky and Kay Burley talking about, you're not a qualified journalist. What's a qualified journalist these days? I mean, you can go to journalism school and learn shorthand, typing. But it's how you behave. You need to when you get up in the morning, you need to find the truth, and you want to establish the facts. And it doesn't matter what partisan interest you have, because that's a political activist. But these days, it has become acceptable. In fact, it has become the norm now that you enter the profession with very strident political opinions that you wish to prosecute. And
you
should focus on that. And anything inconvenient to that, you will either ignore or omit, or you'll twist. So I don't know where journalism is going. I don't know what. I mean, if you go to a university, I've worked at universities, not in the journalism department, but you wonder what the heck's going on in these journalism departments these days. What kind of ethics are they teaching these journalists? You know, you approach a story it's already worked out, then you work backwards. I mean, one of the things I accuse the BBC of doing all the time is starting with the conclusion and then working backwards to fit that conclusion. That's not journalism. That's political activism. And the difference, they don't know. You know, Adam Bolton on Sky and Kay Burley and all the rest of the BBC gang and Robert Peston, they don't understand that distinction. They truly don't understand it. So what's going on with the training? I don't know. Well, I mean, it's a mess. Journalism is a mess. Let's face it.
I mean, Robert Peston is one of the most egregious. So full of his own self-importance as well. And actually, on another level, also unable to ask one question. He has to ask about 3 or 4 questions, which are all, like most of the questions I heard today, they were gotcha questions. As you said, David, they presumed the guilt was there. Cummings guilty, has to go, and therefore work back from that. There was no real desire to establish any level of truth.
I'm not interested, David. The thing is, they're not interested in the truth at all. That's why his explanations about his autistic 4-year-old daughter, that was, quick, get out of our way. We're not interested in that. We don't want to know about that, because that might get us away from our narrative, our preconceived conclusion. So forget that. It's not that there may be heartless people. I mean, maybe they are concerned about 4-year-old girls, but that 4-year-old was getting in the way of their narrative, and they were not interested in that 4-year-old girl. So that made them come across as quite heartless. I mean, maybe they are heartless people. They're certainly pretty amoral people. I think if you work in the media these days, I think the only qualification you need, forget shorthand, is amoral. You have to be amoral. I think that's the only qualification.
Which is why your job. Yeah, and that's why I would recommend anybody not to go near the mainstream media, any young person that is, because you sort of have to have your soul stripped away. And as someone's just said here, David, I'm sure you can see it. I mean, Alex Dean said that this felt like the aftermath of the Salem witch trials. How have we come to this situation in the UK where I guess right now, tonight, there's got to be, probably millions of people who agree with Alex and yourself and me as well, that this just feels so badly wrong.
I think it's a wider issue. I think the last 4 or 5 years since 2016 was a watershed year, and I think there's a sort of divide now between ordinary people and our masters and the gatekeepers. In some ways, the mainstream media, they are owned by the elite and the establishment. Yeah, and I think it's kickback against people. that people are now rising up and thinking, hey, I want to find out the truth. I don't trust the gatekeepers. And those gatekeepers, the MSM, have had it their own way for many, many years. And you can feel the petulance in them, that the little people are challenging them and asking questions, and they don't like it one little bit. And I think it's just going to get worse, because the more people challenge them, the more we're on social media, challenge them, looking for alternative sources of information, doing our own research, being independent. That's challenging that position of power, which is effectively challenging the establishment and the elite who own the media, who use the media to propagandize people.
Well, I see, David, someone's just come up with something which will be music to your ears. License fees being cancelled by the millions. And I think, folks, to those watching, this is something that is perhaps not as readily understood as it might be. And I found you, David, to be a great source of information on these things. But just talk us through, this is the BBC. We're going to chat now about the BBC particularly, yes, and what's happened in terms of, let's talk about license fees over the past 10 years and what impact that's had on this big, bloated Stalinist monstrosity.
Well, on average, and this has been a pattern over the last 10 years, you're probably finding about almost 1 million television licenses are cancelled every year. Now, I was speaking to a BBC contact of mine. He told me that's because people move house and don't bother getting another license. And he also said it's because people die. And then I reminded him the population has increased 10 million over the same period. So in fact, they should be increasing licenses, not decreasing. That trend, I think, is picking up quite nicely. And obviously, people like myself, we're elated to see so many people are taking. I think they're deciding for themselves, I don't want this anymore. I don't need this anymore. There are better alternative sources. I mean, look at us now talking here now. I mean, maybe 10, 15 years ago, we could never have done this.
Yeah.
You could on the TV now, I think, and get some pretty much what I call globalist propaganda from the BBC, Channel 4, Sky, and the rest of it. So I think there's a movement going on, and I'm very heartened. I've not had a license for 5 years. I've not watched any television program, live or recorded, for 5 years. I sometimes see things on Twitter, that clips and stuff like that. And I think people are thinking, what am I missing? And they say, I'm not actually missing that much. And I think this trend, I think people are telling other people. I mean, I've written that. I've said to people, get a life, go and find out your own information, go and get a Roku stick. You can do streaming services, or just get a life. Go out there and walk and talk and do things. Go swimming, do your garden, read books. There are alternatives out there.
Well, indeed there are. But David, if I just have to stop you there, I've got to show you something that I'm sure you'll have something to say about. Let me just click up a headline, which I think everyone should find entertaining. Here we go. So we have people have turned to the BBC in their droves during the pandemic. Says the very oddly hairstyled Tony Hall, actually. And
yes.
So, I mean,
that's hell of a barnet.
That is one hell of a barnet, yeah.
It's a syrup. That's a great syrup, isn't it?
It is. And
he's from you wouldn't believe he's from Birkenhead, which is not far from me in Liverpool, which is quite incredible.
Oh, I think he's lost his roots in every sense of the word.
Somehow I think so. Camel Shipyard is in Birkenhead, a big working class area. So
yeah, well, he also, this is the other thing. I just clicked this up as well.
Yeah,
Hall says 94% of the UK has access to BBC for all this important information. He took his hat off to the BBC staff.
His wig off.
He took his he took his wig off. And so let's talk about that. Okay, let's talk about that. Let's take Tony Hall apart. David.
Well, first of all, I would be highly suspicious of any statistic quoted by the BBC in support of itself. 94%. I mean, first of all, it's all very well boasting that the British population can't leave their houses and suddenly people have started watching you. But the only reason they've started, if that's true, let's say that is true. Well, the only reason, of course, is that we can't get out of our damned houses, and we don't want to watch Antiques Roadshow and Murder, She Wrote repeat. So the only other thing we've got is the BBC. So it's quite a claim. You know, guess what? We've locked the population in, and now they're starting to watch TV. When they go out again, what's going to happen then? Well, presumably they're going to drop off again. But I strongly suspect that 94% figure will have come from a BBC-friendly researcher. And I strongly suspect also they will probably paid about 100,000. Are we paying for Tony Hall's wig? Yes, I think. I think we are. And I also suspect that research has been commissioned. What you often find, David, is anything positive about the BBC is usually commissioned by the BBC, and quite often it's done by companies like Ipsos Mori. They'll pay them £100,000 and say, can you tell us how popular we are? Certainly, here's the check for £100,000. Oh, guess what? 94% are watching you, BBC. Fantastic. Or it'll be someone like the media department of Cardiff University, a really hard left-wing university, who tell the BBC that people think you're right-wing and pro-Brexit. So don't worry, BBC, you're doing everything fine. And the check's in the post. So that 94% figure, I haven't got a clue where that comes from. That could have been a straw poll in the BBC canteen. I don't know. Who knows? I mean, but don't forget, this is the same guy who 3 years ago told the nation that 80% of us were happy paying Gary Lineker £2.5 million a year. 80%. And then you saw the small print and it said, research commissioned by the BBC by Ipsos Mori. So you can pay £100,000 and they will tell you exactly what you want to know. He's talking complete off, because you go on social media and you just see the amount of people cancelling their television licenses. And one of my favourites, by the way, is Trustpilot. Dave Vance, did you used to work for the Beeb?
No,
I don't think you did you?
I've never worked for the BBC, and I'm pleased to say one of my proudest moments was being banned by the BBC in 2015 because I said some harsh truths that the little snowflakes in the BBC didn't like. Would I ever go back in the BBC? That'll be the day after hell freezes over. So I hope that's answered your question. Back to you again, David.
I think the implication is, Dave, that you must be quite bitter or something about something.
Bitter me? No, far from it. Because the one thing I learned, David, and that's actually segues nicely into a lot of your work, the one thing that you learn when you actually do enter the orbit, and I mean, the only thing I did was they invited me on programs to be the token righty so they could beat me up. And what I learned was if any interview I ever did ever in the BBC where there was a presenter, me, and somebody from an opponent, let's say a lefty opponent, the presenter was the other participant. The presenter was always left and liberal, so it was always 2 versus 1. So trust me, to those who ask the question, being in the BBC, if you hold conservative with a small c views, is really unpleasant and not nice, and I would never recommend it to anyone. So I mean, you know, that's so I'm not bitter. I'm actually quite pleased about it.
I can imagine why people, you know, I know the way people think, but so I mean, basically the Tony Hall thing, who's basically going, isn't he, this summer, much against his better.
Yes, he is. Yeah,
I don't think I'm not sure what he really wants to or he doesn't. I think that might be just a bit of spin, because it's basically saying, I think they're trying to draw a line under something here, but to suggest that just because you cut off the head the snake, that the rest of the body is going to die off. I don't know who they're going to get to replace him, but we know the way it works. Though we know the culture. That I've written about the BBC culture. It doesn't matter. It's a very hollow gesture to get rid of Tony Hall. He'll be replaced with someone just ultra liberal, left wing, globalist, pro EU,
female, preferably trans, if not a person of color. Yeah, I mean, the BBC is the ultimate bastion of wokeness in 2020, isn't it? And it does it, David, because another thing, again, I don't think everyone fully gets this. You know, the scale of our funding of this BBC monstrosity is grotesque. So it's like, what, 3.8 billion-ish a year? Billions going to this organization, which is anti-British, not interested in truth, perverse in many ways in some of the narratives it absolutely flows, anti-Brexit. I mean, 3.8 billion, folks, is what it costs to fund the trash that the BBC pushes out. And I mean, you know, David.
And also don't forget, Dave, that it's also becoming more and more metrocentric. I mean, arguably, you could say for a national broadcaster, and don't forget that's part of the deal where it's able to extract 3.8 billion by calling itself a national broadcaster. But in my opinion, it's becoming more metrocentric as the years go by. And arguably, the people of Wales, Scotland, Northeast England, they're even more detached from that audience than they've ever been in their existence, in their 100-year existence. And the more metrocentric it becomes, the more woke it becomes, the more alienated, £400,000 a year, the more alienated that ordinary people are becoming from it. I'm
glad to see Ian Dale is also joining in. Yeah. So we're definitely on to something here, David.
Yes, Ian is now. I forgot what the person said, but Ian Dale's one of those interesting people. I mean, there's a whole people. What do you think about the BBC? You said about conservatives.
Yeah.
What always makes me laugh is the way that there are certain media-approved conservatives, and Ian Dale is one of them.
Yeah.
And I would say someone like Julia Hartley-Brewer,
Oh.
Toby Young. These are not. I don't even think I wouldn't call them real conservatives. I think they are media-approved conservatives. And I'll tell you why I think that, because the books I've written about the BBC, I've actually contacted those people and said, I've written a critique about the BBC. Would you be prepared to talk about it or review it? And I'm stonewalled. They don't want to know, because they know they can't go too far in criticising the BBC. And I think that they're what I call like the Conservative Party, like we talk about, Steve Baker, that kind of conservative, not a real conservative. Because if you dare criticise the BBC, then these people who call themselves conservatives will they'll just ignore you. They will never take my book. They'll never review my book. We'd never speak to me like you're speaking to me now, because they know they can't overstep that line, and they're very, very conscious of doing that. People like Ian Dale, a conservative who don't say anything naughty about. They'll say something like, look, we don't want you, Mr. Sedgewick, talking about how you can, do this and that with the BBC. We want them to reform. We just want them to be nice and to reform. That's all we want. People like you saying we should get rid of them or subscription. We don't want to talk to you. You're on, you're on the peripheral, and that's their attitude. I mean, you can say certain things as long as the BBC approve it. It's the same with the Telegraph and the Sun and the Daily Mail. If you think they're supposed to be right-leaning newspapers, well, if I send them my book on the BBC, which is I think it's a real critique of the BBC, and I think it's a genuine one based on evidence, they won't give me the time of day, because they don't want to offend the BBC, and they're supposed to be anti-BBC. They're supposed to be BBC critics, but they won't. They will not. They would never show that book of mine. They would never review it ever, because that's a real critique of the BBC. What they will do is they will what they'll do, they will review Robin Aitken's book called The Noble Liar. That's acceptable, because what he's calling for is a little bit of reform. They're not too bad. They've got the right idea. There's nothing really badly that wrong with them. They just need a little bit of reform. So the Sunday Times will publish a review of him, and the Telegraph. They won't touch my book, because my book's a real critique.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And it's so right what you say about they allow certain token conservatives. Hartley-Brewer has been extraordinarily disappointing today. But actually, if you follow her, you wouldn't be maybe that surprised about that.
He hates Donald Trump. He hates Donald Trump.
She does, yeah. And actually, you mentioned Ian Dale as well, who he may be saying hashtag scum media, but Ian Dale has banned me as well. Because Ian doesn't like it when people come on and actually give him a dose of actual straight talking, because that's not what these people are about. They're evasive. They're a bunch of vipers, and the truth is really something that they stumble over, brush it to one side, and continue with the narrative. And one of the things, David, about the lockdown has been we are all sitting at home to whatever degree, and certainly have been anyway. And so obviously, I imagine viewing figures have probably gone up, because, as you said, what else are you going to do? But I also think that potentially contempt for them has gone up in equal measure. I'd certainly like to think so.
Well, I think you're right. But it's interesting, though, that I think it was Greg Dyke who said that the BBC operate in a certain way. They say when someone watches a television program, if they have a rare moment of success, I think they did this at Christmas. They'll often do it at Christmas, and they'll say, "My God, 16 million viewers tuned into Gavin and Stacey. World Cup final. Oh, wow, 20 million people watch the BBC." But the rest of the year, they're silent. And what they don't tell you, of course, is their actual overall figures. And I found this out from my own research in the first book. They've lost 35% of their news audience, and they've lost up to about 50% on their ongoing drama series like EastEnders and Casualty. They're down 50% over 10, 15-year period. They never ever tell you that. All they'll do is they'll just boast. Whenever they get a rare success like this lockdown, they'll suddenly tell you that how many million are watching them. And it's typical BBC tactic, very selective. They choose that with care. Zero views, that's true. Yes.
So tell me more. Tell me about that one again. So this is the new BBC Scottish station then.
Yeah, well, I caught that story myself. They're not very popular in Scotland. When I was in Scotland a couple of years ago, obviously the Scottish independence people, the propaganda was terrible. And I know that people in Scotland have a visceral animosity towards the BBC, especially SNP voters, perhaps.
Yeah.
But I was quite surprised walking around Scotland when I kept on seeing this sticker in people's windows saying BBC not welcome here. And I thought, I've got to get one of those. Actually, so I knocked on someone's door. They were out. I thought, where did you get that from? But I know they're not very popular. I know they launched this Scottish channel. I mean, I don't know anything else apart from you, David, apart from the fact that it was reported on one of the media websites, specialists, getting things assisting with it. But yeah, but the overall trend in BBC programs is just going one way. It's going down.
Yeah. Also, the demographics, younger, as far as I understand anyway, a lot of younger people, that younger generation, they're not watching and they're not consuming media in the way that I did, and I guess perhaps you did as well, and many people watching did. That younger generation is they've tuned out and turned over, and they're not watching traditional broadcast TV, and I think that's a good thing. Obviously, the BBC find that difficult to cope with, which is why one of the things that most concerns me about this lockdown is the BBC's enthusiasm to teach kids. Oh, what could possibly go wrong with that, David?
Yeah, yes.
The BBC. Did you see that?
I heard about it, and it absolutely worried me to death. I mean, what kind of Marxist nonsense are they going to be pumping out? I thought if I had school-age children, there's absolutely no chance the BBC would be teaching them anything. And it's the irony-free way they do it. You know, they still have this assumption that we are the BBC. We know best. It's still there, isn't it? I learned a lot from the book BBC. Yes, well, thank you for that. That's very nice of you to say so. Like cancelling my license. Yes, I'm very heartened when people say to me, "You've articulated what I was thinking, perhaps, and now I'm going to use that information and perhaps to cancel a television license." I should keep a score of all the people that keep telling me they've cancelled their TV license. It would make a great meme to send to the BBC. Several hundred people, have actually said to me, "Thanks, I've cancelled my license now." But yeah, what were you saying a moment ago?
No, I guess I'm saying that with the younger generation not consuming into the BBC, therefore, not only is more and more people. I mean, actually, it's a perfect storm. So if you think about it, as we've talked about previous, David, so there's more and more people cancelling their licenses anyway. There's a young demographic that have no intention of getting a license and consume media totally differently as well. And there's also then a plurality of alternatives. So it's a storm. Is it not a perfect storm that I would love to see crush the BBC and bring it down?
Well, they're fighting a losing battle, David, like you said. People are consuming television in a way that their parents and grandparents would never do. I mean, people don't come in now and sit in front of a television screen, like a family, and pick up the remote control. The great thing that the BBC have always had, of course, was that number 1 and number 2 position on your remote control. That's vitally important. It still is to some extent, but I think people are moving away from television sets. And if you go onto a mobile phone or a laptop, they don't have that advantage. That's a massive advantage, having number 1 and number 2 on your remote control. It's a default position for a lot of people. So you take that advantage away from them, and you just give them a laptop, and you can literally choose any stream in the world. You take away a massive advantage from them. And like you quite rightly say, David, I think Ofcom have done some research, and the average age of the BBC viewer now, BBC One I think is 60 and BBC Two is 61, or maybe it's the other way around. That's a huge problem. And Ofcom, in their reports, Ofcom have noted that this is a big concern. That how do you get younger people back into the BBC when there's so many alternatives around? And actually, I just don't think it's cool. I think people associate the BBC with your parents. I mean, the average age is now 60, 61. Naturally, teenagers are going to start thinking, I don't want to watch the same TV program mum and dad are watching. You know, I want to be watching some hip and cool streams, Netflix, YouTube. Yeah, good point. Yeah. I mean, I actually watch YouTube, and I have no need for I remember the home service. Yes, home service. Yes.
Well, David, we are amongst friends. We are amongst.
Yes, we are. I'm liking these comments a lot. They are absolutely wonderful comments. I was going to say, David, though, that my own viewing, I watch YouTube. I don't understand why anyone would need anything other than YouTube. I mean, there's millions of hours of content on YouTube, and I can spend all night just hopping from one video to another, and the suggested videos come up. Oh, that sounds something I'm interested in. Because I know you have to be careful with YouTube, but I do like the way it suggests similar types of videos. And the censorship is an issue on YouTube, of course, as we know recently. COVID stuff. But if you can just keep to dramas and documentaries, I mean, I watched a great one on Kenneth Williams, old Kenny Williams, last night on YouTube. I don't know what was on mainstream TV, but I suppose it was people like, people murdering their brothers and sisters and the skin falling off and American murders, crime scenes, and that kind of stuff. And I'm just not interested in that. And I think more and more people are realizing the content, as more channels come available, the content becomes less quality. The quality is going down. And I think that's the same for the BBC too.
I remember back in the days when the BBC would regularly phone me round about the time of each year when the TV license was up for renewal, and they'd phone me to have a contrived chat. And my argument always was actually quite modest. I simply said, listen, if you think what you're producing is so good, so crucial, let people choose. Give them the choice. Get rid of your anachronistic license tax. And then if what you're saying is right, it's not going to be a problem because everyone's going to want it and they'll pay for it.
Yes.
But of course, we both know, and the people listening to this know that the BBC, they will never let go of it. It will have to be prized from their dead fingers. Because 3.8 billion, I mean, you'd actually have to fight me quite hard if I had 3.8 billion to get it off me. And the BBC, I'd use it much more wisely. By the way, if someone watching wants to contribute 3.8 billion, please altnewsmedia.net/donate. Off you go. But they won't let go of it, will they?
No, the thought horrifies them. It absolutely horrifies them because I think they know. I think they've done some internal polling, perhaps. And I think they know full well that once that compulsory element goes, I think they're looking at least a 50% drop in subscribers. Now, you think 50%, that could be like £2 billion, perhaps. That's all the perks, the pensions, everything gone. And that's why they resort to blackmail. They'll say to the government, if you cut our license, if we have to subscribe, well, first of all, they tell you that they're so, like you've made the paradox is that if you are as popular as you say you are, then surely going to a subscription model can only increase your income. Because they claim to have 25 million licenses in operation, there or thereabouts. Well, if you become a global, I mean, as a global international operator, which you obviously are, you clearly don't have very much affinity with UK. Then why don't you become a truly global operator? Forget the world service. Just let people subscribe to the BBC around the world. Yeah. If you think you can get the people of Addis Ababa to pay you £150 a year to subscribe to your website, BBC, or the people of Cairo or Lagos to pay you £150, then go for it. Do it if you're that popular. And of course, the reason they won't do that is they know, and I think they've done the internal polling, and I think they've been researching this for quite some time. I'm absolutely certain. I've done my own, research myself. I can tell you that I would estimate that at least 50% of people would stop paying BBC, and I think it might even be more. And they know it, and it terrifies them. And that's why they blackmail the government and say, look, if you subscription, we're going to have to, they call, what's the word they use? Cultural vandalism. But it doesn't make any sense. Because if you're so popular, you won't do any cultural vandalism. You'll be expanding your service. You'll have more money pouring in from more licenses because everyone loves your quality and trusts your news. So why do the BBC seem to feel that they're going to reduce if they're so popular? I mean, the only way you get cultural vandalism is if they're not getting £4 billion. But if in a free market, David, Netflix has something like 120 million subscribers. The BBC only has 25 million. So the market is out there for the BBC to exploit. So why not exploit it?
Well, one of the things you mentioned, cultural vandalism. One of the things that I shouldn't do, but I have done, as you travel the world and you're in different places, sometimes actually it's one of the choices you get. If you want to see any English speaking media, you'll pick up BBC World Service. Now, if ever there was a channel that's more anti-British than the British, than that channel, I don't know what it is. It's absolutely horrific. And what bothers me is, and they've done it for years now, and especially as the BBC's got more and more woke, they broadcast this poison around the globe. So I don't understand. Is it because the government's so scared of their domestic power that they don't just turn around to them and say, subscription model from now on, guys, that's it. If you want to pay for Gary Lineker on whatever he's on, $2 million a year, then just make sure you get all those subscriptions. Why do the Tories in particular? Because Labour love them, obviously.
Forget Labour.
Yeah, please. But what's the issue with the Conservatives and the BBC?
Well, I think the first one just sheer cowardice. I think it would. The tantrum would be immense. The tantrum would be absolutely immense. The Metropolitan Lovey set would be there attacking the government. The government would, like we've seen with Dominic Cummings, you can see how the media can whip up this frenzy. And Conservatives are basically terrified to get on the wrong side of the BBC will incur the wrath of the establishment. So I think that's one of the big reasons why it's easy to let sleeping dogs lie rather than or to poke the beast. Remember John Whittingdale, the Conservative MP back in Department for Culture and Media back in 2015. He made some very positive noises about scaling down the BBC. I don't think that he was talking subscription then. He was talking about scaling it down. And you noticed immediately that suddenly stories started leaking out about John Whittingdale dating not a call girl. I think it was just a dating website, and he met a woman on a dating website who'd been a dancer or something. But suddenly, John Whittingdale's private life hit the mainstream media, and he was removed from post. So, and ever since then, he's become almost like, from being a very vociferous critic of the BBC, he's become almost like a supporter. And it's almost as if, there you go, Mr. Whittingdale. That's what happens if you get on the wrong side of the BBC. And I do understand. I've been told that they do have certain information and can hold certain stories back on individuals who they consider a threat. If that individual comes into a position, and that story, like the John Whittingdale story, suddenly got leaked. They've known about it for a long time, but it got leaked at the moment in time. So you answered your question, David, the Conservatives. I think it's partly cowardice. I think it's laziness. Why rouse this beast? This beast is going to hit us back, and it's going to hit us hard. So there's cowardice involved. But also, I think, David, they're not Conservatives. It's the majority of Conservative MPs agree with the BBC agenda. And that's the real issue. I mean, can you imagine Anna Soubry or Dominic Grieve? I mean, if you questioned, I don't know how many Tories MPs are there, 360 or something? I don't know how many there are. But, I saw a tweet from Matt Hancock, I think, and he said, this was last year, the BBC is an amazing asset. So if you did a straw poll of Conservative MPs, David, I can probably guarantee that about 90% of them would be fully supportive of it. And it's only the ones they would call hard right, Ian Duncan-Smith, Bill Cash, John Redwood, real Conservatives who would be all for scrapping it. So that's where we are. They're not real Conservatives. They are soft left liberal metropolitans. And the second one is they're terrified. And they're just too lazy because it would be the BBC are too big to fail, like the banks. There's this aura that the BBC is just too big and it can't fail, like HSBC or Barclays Bank can't fail. So it's indolence and it's political apathy, and it's just they're not Conservatives, because any Conservative MP who supports the BBC is not a Conservative. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I think that is the explanation of the cowardice of the government. But they should surely understand that. Well, I suppose if they're not real Conservatives, it doesn't really matter. But the BBC is a major impediment to making Britain great again. So we've gone through all these years of Brexit. And hopefully by the end of this year, we finally I just want to walk away. I don't care if it's a trade deal. I want the hell out of everything to do with the EU before it crashes and burns. But the BBC will continually and will forevermore be a voice to try and inveigle us back into the EU. So the government is allowing a major impediment to the government agenda to continue in such an influential channel. I mean, your suggestion about, you're the first person I've heard to say that. Brilliant point, actually, about on your remote control, the BBC get 1 and 2. Well, could we not do something like move them to 6 or 7? that wouldn't have affect. I reckon their viewerships.
Well, it would level the playing field out, David. But the sense of entitlement. You must remember the sense of entitlement within that organisation. I don't think people can just imagine. Can you imagine the US funding CNN?
Yeah, good one, Tony. Yeah.
The BBC equivalent. I believe you can't escape CNN in the public space in America. But you talk about the Conservatives. Yeah, the real paradox, David, is of course is that the BBC, the same BBC that the Conservative Party will validate by allowing them a royal charter every single time. That's never under issue when with the Conservative government. That's the same BBC that works tirelessly to undermine Conservative policy. And that makes me think that the Conservative Party isn't truly conservative, because if I was and you, David, if we were running the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, I would have them in my office, and that license would be stripped off them. In the 1980s, go back to the 1980s, you had Norman Tebbit, Lord Tebbit,
Yes.
ran a department, had a special department going within the government somewhere, which catalogued the BBC's anti-conservative bias. Now, this was all during the mid-80s. And they had a huge file, and this was the Conservative. They were the strongest in the mid-80s, as we know, the Mrs. Thatcher government, especially in the mid-80s. It was a very strong government. Labour didn't have a shot. They catalogued it. Norman Tebbit and his colleagues catalogued BBC bias, and there were some huge numbers. I've mentioned some in my book, Maggie's Militant Tendency, the disgraceful Panorama hatchet job, various other things. And they did nothing, David. Norman Tebbit knew, Mrs. Thatcher knew, they did not. In fact, Mrs. Thatcher invented Channel 4, for God's sake, another left-wing metropolitan, anti-conservative. I mean, she probably didn't conceive it like that, but that's where it ultimately ends up at the end of the day. The BBC, under Lord Reith, you could say that until I would say until the 1950s was probably conservative with a small c. But we can see where it's going now. Every single broadcast media outlet will eventually, sooner or later, get into a position of left-wing politics. That's where they all end up. Why that happens, I don't know. We're talking about university and the education system. But what really gets me is that the Conservatives had that time in the 1980s to radically reform the BBC, and they wasted it. And we are now paying the price. And I blame Norman Tebbit and Margaret Thatcher, and I blame that Cecil Parkinson, Edwina Curran. I blame that administration, because that was the time they could have acted. And they could have done it then. Now, they wouldn't do it, because as I think I wrote in my book, the moment the Conservatives now turn around and say, right, we're going to do something about the BBC shout, that's what fascists do, everybody, isn't it? Look what they're doing to us. We live in a fascist, although we already do, actually.
Under them, But so it seems that the solution to the BBC isn't to hope for this sort of the day dawns where a government actually announces the axing of the license tax. What will happen? The more realistic scenario is that more people will just calve away, not pay their license fees, consume alternative media, weakening the BBC all the time. The BBC continues to be more woke. It therefore becomes more marginal in many regards, and it's going to be a slow death, I guess.
Yes, a very slow death. That's the only thing. That's the only thing I think that can happen, because effectively, as far as I can see, the BBC and the political class are one and the same thing. They're interchangeable, David. Don't forget the amount of Labour MPs and Conservative MPs who go to Whitehall, Westminster, and vice versa, a Conservative Central Party office. There's quite a lot of toing and throwing. The council license fee, yeah. Well, it is, but I'm a little bit more pessimistic at that, and I'll tell you why, David. Because if the people of Britain turn off, which they are doing in great numbers, it doesn't really matter. And I think in that second book I've written, the reason I think it doesn't matter is because effectively the BBC, all they're really interested in doing is broadcasting to the establishment. And all they really want to, they don't care if the people in the Shires or the Northeast or the Northwest turn off. They're not really bothered about that, as long as the government are propping them up. And any shortfall of license fee, as long as they can get the government, they can bully the government to make up that shortfall, that's fine. But at the end of the day, I think their main concern is purely to broadcast to what I'd call the liberal elite within that London-centric bubble. When the BBC and Sky and ITV, when they construct their news, it's purely to influence about 10, 20,000 influencers. That includes the political, education, top civil servants. They know that there's about 20,000 individuals, pretty much based in London or the South, who consume BBC content. The fact that we are screaming in the North or the South or Scotland and saying that's rubbish, they don't care about that. All they know is we want our messages to get through to those people. And as long as we can do that, do we really care if people in the Northeast or the Northwest are watching us? Not really. As long as we've got plenty of money coming in, our main aim is to control the political agenda. And we do that by broadcasting to people who believe in us. In other words, the establishment, the political and media establishment, judicial and education too. So people can switch off in their millions, David, but you know something, at the end of the day, I think they would keep going as long as they have that core audience in central, basically in London, let's face it, down in the south.
I mean, the one particular program I should mention to you, which I'm old enough to have been watching Doctor Who from whenever the Cybermen were in their early days, right?
David Troughton, yeah.
Yeah, I used to William Hartnell. Yep, I used to hide behind the settee, scared of a Cyberman.
You don't look old enough, though. I have to say,
coming out.
It's sycophantic here, but you don't look old enough, David, for William Hartnell.
It's my youthful appearance, but and my clean living lifestyle. But here's the thing: look what the BBC have done to Doctor Who as an example of, you take a franchise that kind of faded away, then it came back a bit, and look at what they've done. Look at their viewing figures, look at the ratings, but look at the wokeness. You know, they had to get.
Yes, well, I don't actually watch it, but I have heard a lot of comments about the fact they got a female doctor, didn't they? They got a female doctor. I believe all the stories now are political.
Yeah, so everything's. It's like somebody said. It's like somebody said here, David, in a comment which I just zapped up there. Even the fiction that they have, the narrative flows right through. You know, it may as well be a news program, because the narrative, it never goes away. You know, there are all their multiple narratives, which are liberal, elitist narratives, and that's why ultimately they're useless at every level.
And that's why some people have made the argument that you should split BBC News from, say, BBC Drama, and people then could subscribe or not subscribe. You could split them up, but I don't think so, because I think the politics has now infused the drama, light entertainment to such an extent, it doesn't really matter anymore. I think you could have made that argument maybe 10 or 15 years ago. You could have said, okay, well, look, you don't have to subscribe to BBC News. You can split the entertainment up, and you can just maybe subscribe to entertainment or drama. But nowadays, like you said, I don't think it matters. Those narratives are everywhere. I don't know. They just can't. They can't. They've reached a point where they exist in this bubble, and they just can't see anyone else's point of view. And I think I've made that point in both my books.
Yeah.
When the groupthink becomes so pervasive, they genuinely can't. I mean, I speak to a couple of BBC insiders, and I can assure you, Dave, that I make some very valid points backed up with evidence, and they will not accept a single point. They will not accept. They think I'm wrong. They just say you're wrong. And I can give them as much evidence as you like. I can make a very, very strong case, and they just turn around and say you're wrong.
Yeah.
You can't get through to them. I can't get through to them. I can use every single rhetorical advice. I can give empirical evidence and data, and they'll just turn around and say, no, that's wrong. They've got an answer for everything. You know, we get complaints from both sides, sort of.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. They love to present themselves as, well, we're under attack by the left, we're under attack by the right, so we must be so contrived, so obvious. Most of us see, well, a lot of us see through that, I think, for what it is. But it is this, it's kind of a determination to present themselves as reasonable. I can remember one moment I had inside a BBC studio was I was in the proverbial green room with one of the hosts of the local BBC, and they were asking me, well, what else do you like to watch on TV? This would have been about maybe 2010 or something like that. I said, well, I love Fox News. I love to watch Fox News. It was like, you know, get the crucifix and the garlic. I was like, the horror. And not just the horror in the presenter, but the horror in the other little guests that they had.
Yes.
And yet, at that time, anyway, Fox was half decent because it allowed people from the left to come on and argue with people from the right, and the presenter would be relatively neutral. It was what the BBC should have been, but will never, ever be.
And like you said, the antipathy towards Fox News is organization-wide. The people I've spoken to, the people I just mentioned a moment ago, they will say things like, well, you don't want us to turn into Fox News. And I say, what? You mean balanced?
Yeah.
I mean, there's a perception that Fox News is a supporter of the Republican Party and Donald Trump. It couldn't be further from the truth. What they mean by saying it's a right wing or it's a Republican or Donald Trump supporter, what they mean by that is they actually have some voices from the Republican and Democrat and Donald Trump supporting against opponents to Donald Trump and the Republican Party. So what they mean is, when they say it's biased, what they mean is it's not 100% left wing and Democrat supporting. What they mean is it's actually got a fairly good balance. If you watch it, there's plenty of critics of Trump on there, and there are supporters of Trump too. So actually, what they're rebelling, what they're sort of like dissing there, is a balanced news program. It's just they hate the fact there's a couple of Donald Trump supporters on there, Jeff Waters, people like that on there, Tucker Carlson. They hate the fact that a couple of their leads actually appear to treat Trump fairly. That's what they hate about it. So I would say to them, that'd be a good model for you to follow, BBC, because guess what? If you had just one news person who said one positive thing about Donald Trump, just once, instead of being 100% biased. But they hate Fox News because Fox News does actually get a balance in there. They prefer CNN, of course, because it's 100% anti-Trump.
Yeah.
My BBC contacts have not got a problem with CNN or MSNBC. They love them. They love them. It's just Fox News, because Fox News got Tucker Carlson, who sometimes says some positive things about Donald Trump.
Yeah, which is and I
think what I hate it.
The thing is, there's that terrible homogeneity, and we saw it today in the Rose Garden in Downing Street, where actually, when it comes to looking at sort of different kinds of journalism and different approaches, I'm reminded of, the line from Animal Farm when the pigs looked at the humans and the humans looked back to the pigs and they couldn't really decide which was which. And I looked around that Rose Garden and I looked at them all socially distancing, unlike outside, unlike when they were like a mob outside Dominic Cummings' house. And they're all the same. They there's such a depressing group of people that the BBC is egregious. Sky News is egregious as well, by the way. Sky News Australia, so much better. Heads up to my pal Rita Pahini down down under. But I mean, you just look at what we have, and it just doesn't give the people what I think they want, which is variety, David, which can be interesting debates. And that's why I think ultimately, and I've believed this now for a number of years, not least why I formed altnewsmedia.net, to try and provide different voices and different approaches and different discussions. And hopefully, we can continue to chip away, take audience from them, enlighten minds. And with that in mind, can I just say to people, because we're coming to the end now, David's books, which I put up earlier, I'm going to stick them up again. They're masterful. They're extremely they're very detailed, David, very, very detailed. The Fake News Factory being David's most recent one. I've read them both, and I think, David, you mentioned earlier the fact that these journalists don't even do their work. They don't get the detail. They don't delve into
laziness. Just
your books are the exact opposite, because I would recommend both these books to everybody watching this, by the way.
And I get a lot of flack from BBC apologists for going into detail. It surprises them. It shocks them so much. I'll get quite a lot of fake reviews from BBC apologists who clearly are shocked that someone would dare actually delve that deep and to expose actual factual inaccuracies, and they just can't take it.
I think
they attack me personally as if, how dare you expose BBC lies?
But that's all you've done, and in these books, folks, if you read these books, what you will discover that David does is he just details essentially the facts. You can then make your mind up in terms of how you think the BBC is behaving, but beyond any doubt, it is a fake news factory. At a time when many, because of the lockdown, many other factories are closed down. I sure as hell wish the BBC was closed down. But the next best thing, someone saying, how can we donate? If you just follow under David, just a quick plug for me. Go to altnewsmedia.net/donate Henry. If you drop £1 or whatever it is into the box, whatever it is, just to help us continue to have people. I'll also provide the links to these books. I've been asked for that. I will put that out on my Twitter timeline. So please jump over onto Twitter when we're finished, and you'll be able to go and perhaps, David, also, can you also tell us where can people buy your books, because they're brilliant?
Well, the only place, David, at the moment is Amazon, for my sins. I'm not a great fan of Amazon, but it's just the easiest publishing platform. So just on Amazon at the moment.
Okay, folks. Well, what you'll do is when I'm finished, shortly thereafter, I'll put up the links. Go and read them. I think, if anything, the only thing, David, I would say about your books, if you think the BBC's bad at this point, read David's books, and you're going to realize that it's so much more pernicious. It's worse than you actually think. So on that positive note, David, can I thank you very much for being with me tonight?
Yes, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
On the live stream. I hope you've enjoyed it. Listen, folks, thank you all. And the numbers are very high. Thank you very much for being part of this tonight. And David, I hope you'll come back and we can, in the time ahead as well, continue to talk about the BBC, but talk about the media, because these are fundamental matters of importance. So thank you.
Hopefully the next time we talk, hopefully this monster will be dying a little bit more. It'll die a little bit more.
Let's hope so. But that's it for now. Thanks everyone for being part of this. Speak again soon. Bye everyone.
Bye.